Bertemu kembali, baik, seperti yang kita tahu penularan COVID-19 dan juga pelaksanaan Perintah Kawalan Pergerakan PKP memberikan sedikit kesan kepada ekonomi kita dan bukan sahaja Malaysia tetapi di ke ekonomi negara di serata dunia. Sebab Malaysia sebagai sebuah negara yang terbuka dan bergantung pada ekspor dan pelaburan kini agak terkesan dengan pelaksanaan PKP dan juga penularan wabak ini. Untuk kita melihat reaksi terkini pasaran dan juga Bursa Malaysia selepas 13 hari kita mengalami PKP ini dan juga penularan COVID-19, bersama saya sekarang menyertai saya menerusi Google Hangout secara langsung adalah saudara Alvin Wong, Ketua Pegawai Eksekutif Equities Tracker, dan saya akan meneruskan perbualan ini dalam bahasa Inggeris. Alvin, thanks so much for joining us. First of all, I want to share with our viewers the movement of Bursa Malaysia, latest movements of the Bursa Malaysia for the past few days, and I believed it closed at around 1,300 points. Kalau kita boleh kongsikan graf Bursa Malaysia itu, if you look at the past few days, especially since 19th of March, there's a cliff there before that because of COVID. But since 19th of March, more or less, it has been climbing despite all that we're going through. How do you read this? What does this mean?
I think if you look at crisis in general, I think this is not a localized event. This is a global event. If you're purely looking at the CI, I'm thinking, sentiment is a lot better because if you look at globally, US have announced that they have approved $2 trillion. Out of $16 trillion of US supply, they have created a lot of money. So I believe this is still fairly short-term sentiment that people are rejoicing. But I think the longer-term effects have yet to be seen.
What do you think those longer-term effects would be for Malaysia and for the local market?
I mean, if you look at what's happening around the world, US have now overtaken China as the number one in terms of coronaviruses, and second is actually Italy. I don't believe, if you look at the curve, I don't believe we have actually seen the full impact of the coronavirus on the economy yet. This is still quite early days. If you remember, China started up in December and January when the lockdown happened, and really you saw the spike in February, right? So I think now the numbers have not spiked yet simply because not enough testing has been done, or they are just starting to impose lockdowns, and they're just starting to do testing on, especially in the US.
Don't you think that the sentiment for investors, whether local or foreign, is this is the time to buy? Because we're seeing that it's early days, it's pretty early to tell. We may not have seen the worst for COVID-19 here in Malaysia. We hope we have, but we might not have seen the worst. But we're seeing the graph, we're seeing a bit of a climb there. Do you think investors are starting to get the sense that this is probably the start of the time that they want to buy?
I think in all recessions, I recently did a study on recessions, and over the last 95 years, since 1929, if you look at the average span of how long recessions last, a simple average will bring you to about 14 months, right? And if you're looking at recession kicking in today, or let's say even earlier this month, the last crisis in 2008 took us 8 months for us to see the bottom. I don't think it's very different this time, except maybe what happened in 2008 was quite fixable because they could create a lot of money and actually push or cushion the whole economic downturn. Right now with the coronavirus, it is that the enemy is invisible and the cure is not found yet, or vaccine.
Right. We are seeing, differing sentiments. You're drawing parallels between now and the 2008 and 2009 financial crisis. Do you think the recovery will be the same? The trajectory of the recovery will be the same as 10 years ago, or is this time worse?
I believe this time might be worse than 2008, 2009. Because we don't have a solution. And if you remember 2008, 2009, they could create a lot of money because people could still walk around and actually do business transactions. today what we're seeing is a lot of increase in money supply, but we are unable to improve, we are unable to do business as usual. So the number of transactions on the ground will definitely fall. So if you have a lot of money supply, that's only half of the equation. You need velocity of money for GDP to actually show some signs of recovery.
Right, the 250 billion economic stimulus plan announced by the government, of course, this takes a huge chunk out of government coffers. Of course, this will also drive up our fiscal deficit, but it will hopefully will spur on the economy as much as it can, provide money for the general public, provide money for small companies. What do you think this plan does for investor sentiment?
I think we have to laud the government that actually came out with that plan. I think the biggest impact that the economy will feel would be from the moratorium of the 6 months, because that actually, from their estimates, is about 100 billion. The second biggest chunk is actually the EPF withdrawals and also the reduction in EPF rates, right? I think that was estimated to be about 40 billion combined. I think these two are really good calls, because not only do they provide liquidity into the market, they also don't touch your fiscal deficit. I think the actual fiscal deficit is projected to be about 25 billion. But I believe if situation gets worse, the government will still have room to maneuver even more, and I think all economies after 2008 have created a self-imposed discipline of debt to GDP ratio. But I believe because we only had 50-60%, there's still room to go beyond that. And I think when we have to choose between survival or financial discipline, I think governments will take the rational choice, but they will look for survival.
Briefly, Alvin, last question. I know it's a fool's game to try and guess, and it's still early days, but still want to pick your brain. How long do you think we'll take to recover?
A lot of people have asked me this question, and I don't have that answer. I think two things can happen. If all governments come together and say, yes, let's lock it down for 3 months until all the cases globally are reduced significantly, I think then we can see a much easier pathway to where this will end. However, governments are now being very sporadic. They all do what they like within their own economies. So, and if you look at it, the number of planes that are still flying, it is quite scary to see. So because it's an uncoordinated effort, it's very hard to predict how long that will take. Now, also, the next question will be vaccines, right? How long would vaccines take? Even if they discover it tomorrow, how long would it take to produce? Number two, how long would it take to distribute to 7 billion people? So really, I think it's either or. I think the first option is a lot easier, but it requires cooperation globally.
Thanks so much, Alvin. Alvin Wong, Ketua Pegawai Eksekutif Ikuti Striker, melihat bagaimana ekonomi dan pasaran Malaysia memberi reaksi kepada Perintah Kawalan Pergerakan dan Penularan COVID-19.